On the next episode of Talkin' Thrones, we talk about Season 2, Episode 2, entitled The Nightlands. I'll admit, Pat, this was a lot slower than that Gangbusters premiere that we had last week, so you got anything to say here?
The only thing I know is I don't know if this title lands, right? Let's see if the Talkin' TV audience can dissect this one.
Let's see if they actually remember what the Nightlands actually refers to. If you do, it'll be amazing.
Let us know.
Yeah, let us know, please. All of that and more. Stay tuned. All right, Pat, so we're in the thick of it now. Season 2, Episode 2, and Eric is already chipping in. I love his comments where I'm like, Season 2, the first half of Season 2 is probably the section that I have the hardest time remembering. And after this episode, I think that kind of makes sense as far as that goes, because following up that Gangbusters premiere that we had last week, it feels like there isn't a lot that happens in this episode primarily, but I find that this is the portion where the interesting thing about Season 2 is Season 2, in a weird way, is still kind of very similar structurally to Season 1, and that the first 5 episodes are all set up, but the next 5, it's like all Gangbusters action, just nonstop one right after another. But I know we're in for like a Gangbusters episode next episode, so like I guess the proper format would be more of like an every other episode kind of a thing. But I don't know, what did you think after rewatching this episode, The Nightlands?
Yeah, Dom, I'll say this episode pretty much was a setup episode. There's a lot of scenes that are basically just like, hey, here we go. This is what Cersei's doing, and this is how Cersei's reacting to Tyrion, and this is how Varys is acting with Tyrion's arrival and promotion to Hand of the King. Here's what this person's doing. For the most part, these scenes are necessary because it sort of sets the gameplay for this season, what's going to happen and all the dynamics. But yeah, I agree with you. It's sort of, there's some good parts in this particular episode, but there's nothing that overwhelms and like fills you with joy. I don't know, maybe that's not the way to put it.
Well, this is definitely an episode where it's another one of those episodes similar to, I'm trying to think last season, probably Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things, where it's a lot of or Lord Snow, where a lot of information is revealed, but not a whole lot actually happens as far as that goes. But the information that's revealed is still crucial as far as the setup for the rest of the show goes. And I feel like with all the scenes all of the primary scenes that happen in this episode, as far as this episode is primarily obviously still in King's Landing with Tyrion, but we spend a lot of time north of the Wall. We spend a lot of time on islands on opposite side of Westeros, continuing with Stannis, and then obviously then with this is where Theon really starts to come into his own as well. We got a few brief moments kind of recapping with us, but this episode is primarily Arya and Theon's episode, in addition to Tyrion's. As we know, Tyrion has kind of become front and center of the show in the second season at the very least. But we don't get any Joffrey or Sansa in this episode. We don't get any Robb in this episode. So this is definitely, I feel like, kind of an ancillary episode as far as all of them. It's interesting to me how all of the major characters that we follow kind of throughout the course of the show have like relatively like in the background parts for at least the first couple seasons before they really start to come into their own in later seasons. Like Daenerys has one scene in this entire episode, and like I think it's safe to say that we can both agree that.
All right, well, Dom, let's just talk about the Daenerys scene right now.
Can we just get that out of the way real quick before we talk about the rest of the episode?
Because I wrote it off. I was like, that's it for this episode. Okay. So basically, the fact is, she's just kind of laying there. They're all distraught. Like the sun's like has beaten them. They don't want to walk any further. They're stuck in the middle of the wasteland. And essentially one of the horses comes up with no rider on it. And there's blood trickling from the pouch on the side of the horse. And Jorah goes over there and he's like, oh yeah, no one wants to see what's in here. And Daenerys is like, I gotta see.
It's pretty obvious what's in there.
Yeah, it's a severed head of,
Recaro. Poor Recaro.
Oh, is it? Oh, I didn't even know he had a named character.
He did have a name, yes. Aggo, Recaro, and I forgot the third one of those three that she said no. But in the books, is still alive and well.
Yeah, and
not
so
much in the show.
The main thing is Daenerys is distraught and like, I'll get my revenge, and then essentially tries to comfort the wife
The handmaiden, yeah.
yeah, and you know, like, okay, like she needed to be comfort, but like that was it. Like it was sort of a false promise. Like, yeah, we'll set up a funeral pyre and burn the head, and that's it. So basically, the rest of the episode's happening. We know that they're just building a fire and burning that head.
Yep, and that is the extent of what Daenerys is. Yeah, it's safe to say that Daenerys does not have a very strong season 2. I think like we haven't even gotten to Karth yet, which is where the majority of her stuff happens, and it's very clear that like Martin just kind of needed her to like didn't really have any idea of what he wanted to do with her yet, because he's like, shit, I can't have her sail to Westeros yet. I have this kind of cool idea of how she can come into her own, but for right now, she's mostly just got to learn some information about her past. You know, kind of that infamous, storyline that you see in fantasy storylines. So he kind of just has her chill in this one steady. But yeah, man, Daenerys still has a long way to go as far as before she's to the point of like burning King's Landing to the ground. But
I understand like she's at rock bottom again and she has to sort of work her way up. But the fact is, this particular episode, it's just kind of a throwaway scene. It just, again, shows you that their hope is on the down. And for the most part, it's like, are they going to make it out of there? And so it almost feels like an unnecessary scene. And, the next episode, I believe, we get a little more action, in terms of them moving towards.
Well, actually, if I'm remembering correctly, I got to check, but I don't think they're in the next episode at all.
Oh, really?
I think we gotta wait 2 episodes before we actually see them finally arrive at Karth. They don't arrive at Karth until 4 episodes into the season.
Yeah, so I'll rephrase it. The next little bit of story that we get from their timeline.
Oh, season 2 Daenerys, we were not going to be kind to you, I got to admit. But let's get to something more fun. So let's get to King's Landing with Tyrion, because this is where Tyrion arrived in King's Landing the last episode, but now we finally get to see Tyrion in action. I mean, this is the whole reason why I love Tyrion, why he's my favorite character, because we finally get to see him as the boss. We get to see him in action. We get to see him start to make decisions ultimately. So we start off with him going to his chambers. He sees
he's
Varys
whistling.
in there. Whistling,
he's
always
happy as can
same
be.
Song. Yeah, he's best. He's riding high. He's on cloud 9 right now. That's how you know it's like, oh man, this is not gonna last, because no character is ever happy for this long. No character is ever this happy in Westeros or in the Game of Thrones verse. So he arrives at his quarters. Varys is there having a conversation with Shay. And Tyrion obviously sees what's going on and gives Varys not so veiled threat in a way that Varys was kind of veiled threatening him as far as revealing him. It's like, yeah, I'm not Ned Stark. If you threaten me, I am not going to hesitate to put your head on a spike, ultimately. So I was always really interested in this scene, right? Because obviously we know that Tyrion and Varys become fast friends as the seasons go on, ultimately. But earlier, this is kind of the beginning of their friendship, because Tyrion's still relatively new in the city. He obviously doesn't want what happened to Ned and Jon Arryn to happen to him. So here's Varys kind of basically saying, hey, I know everything that you've got going on here. What's up? So, what do you make of this scene?
Well, essentially, I think that's sort of the premise of this whole episode in Tyrion. So, Varys is there, and he's making the veiled threat, and Tyrion's like, I'm not going to have anything of it. And for the most part, that's the end of the scene. It puts the kibosh on it. There's a little bit of Varys basically saying, hey, there's this whole Game of Thrones happening, but I seem to outlast and I'm always here, etc. So, he doesn't really take Tyrion's threat too seriously. But, it's one of those like first shots fired across the bow. And I think Varys realizes that Tyrion is a reasonable player. And so I think in this particular scene, they have a little bit of mutual respect by the time they walk into the meeting, the small council meeting.
Yeah, definitely an instance that is quite the opposite of Ned and Littlefinger's interactions from last season, where Varys understands and recognizes that this is somebody who could be a valuable opponent or a valuable ally or just a valuable player in general in the game going forward.
Yeah, ultimately. And ultimately, I think, Dom, like, this probably interaction with Varys probably sparks like the reason why Tyrion acts quickly with the head of the Night's Watch, right? Because that happens later in this episode as well, where he invites
Janos Slynt.
Yeah, Janos. So they invite him over to dinner, and he's like, "Oh, here's some Dornish wine. Here's some great food. Oh, by the way, I don't think you have any. Yeah, I don't think you have any morals
that was the
or
most
ethics."
Donald Trump moment I've ever seen. I'm sorry, you're fired.
Yeah, so essentially, like he blasts him for his role in killing the bastard children of
Right.
Robert, openly, publicly, and really, getting the city against Joffrey, because now Joffrey is his kingdom, is murdering children in the streets, and so I think it's one of those things where. Obviously he betrayed Ned Stark, who was the Hand of the King, and so he says to him, "Hey, I can't have someone that's willing to betray the Hand actually in active duty." And he gives Bronn a promotion as the new head of the,
Watch.
King's Watch, and then just sends him off to basically Castle Black. It's like, hey, I don't care. Joffrey made you a lord. You're now taking those vows.
Yep. Ultimately, yeah, it's kind of crazy. I love this scene, mostly just because it's a power scene, but also it's like, okay, so last episode was like the inkling of Tyrion being a boss. Now we get to see Tyrion being a boss, and he does it oh so well. I love the line where like he slowly builds to it and kind of realizes like I'm not questioning it. It's like I'm not what's it called? What was the line that he said? It's like I'm not questioning your honor. I'm questioning its very existence, or
Exactly.
or something like that.
Yeah, it's very like open, slap in the face. It's not as veiled of a threat as like Varys was, and Tyrion just turns around and he just openly gets rid of this guy, not even pretending to deal with honor or anything like that. It's like, you're a snake in the grass, and I'm getting rid of all venomous creatures.
Weeding out all of the. I think an interesting theme that goes across this entire episode is this idea of subversion that Martin loves so much, which is the idea of kind of what we believe to be honorable versus what actually is honorable. As far as kind of this episode is big as far as expectations versus reality, because we see that with Arya, we see that with Theon, we see that with Stannis, we see that kind of all over the place, and we even see that in kind of the end scene with Tyrion here, where Tyrion asks Bronn afterwards, like, if I asked you to kill a baby, would you do it? Without question. He's like, without question, no. I'd ask how much. And that kind of like brings it all into context with Tyrion. Is like, and he realizes, yeah, the only thing that matters ultimately at the end of the day is power. Where the only reason why he's able to fire Janos Slynt is because he's in the position that he's in, but it has nothing to do with kind of him feeling like he's doing it for the greater good. He kind of has to remind himself and reconnoiter himself, because even though Tyrion claims to be somebody without honor, we know Tyrion for the most part, he's a decent human being. He likes to look out for those who can't look out for themselves, and so, but realizing that these are the types of choices that are necessary in order to be Hand of the King, I think it's a really interesting moment for him.
Yeah, and I think this
forward.
episode is really crucial because essentially in that small council meeting, nothing much happens. It's like Cersei rips up Rob's demands that we saw from the last episode,
Yeah.
and Tyrion has this great
it's
line.
Even to the point where even Tyrion calls out like, "Wow, you are really getting good at ripping up paper, aren't you?"
Yeah, exactly. It's fantastic. That line just hits you, and it's like, yeah,
So good.
But I think
that's
most
like
of
that's like the Ant-Man line. Do you guys just put quantum in front of everything?
yeah, for the most part, I think the fact that the small council meeting with Tyrion, the whole purpose of that scene is really to make sure that we, the audience, identify with Tyrion the most. And that is really takes place when they get the Raven. That's the last order of business in this council meeting, saying that, hey, there's, something going on at the wall. We really need more men to reinforce against what's beyond the wall. And Cersei's like, oh, I don't believe in grumpkins and monsters and all this. Yeah, exactly. And Tyrion says, hey, I believe this. We need to really take this seriously. They are sort of the last defense between, what is beyond the wall and any army that could actually help. And no one really believes him. They just all sort of leave him sitting there at the table. And we as the audience, know from the first season that, there are the White Walkers. They are scary. They're beyond the wall. And they have to be dealt with. And so I think right here, season 2, episode 2, they're really setting Tyrion up to be the main character of the season and someone that we identify with. And I think that's why all these scenes that we have where Tyrion is just, slapping people around and taking their titles and sending them off to the Castle Black, we get behind it because we know that he's sort of, as Varys would put it, for the realm.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting kind of this idea that Tyrion brings up also, which is an idea that really doesn't get echoed until later on, but he does bring up the very real option that, the Night's Watch is all that, as much as we, kind of make fun of him, as much as they've kind of been like derided and made fun of and basically stated that it's like, yeah, they're not at all what they used to be. They're not really honorable. They're just kind of the dumping ground for the realm's criminals. But at the end of the day, they are all that stands between the realm and whatever lies beyond the wall. And nobody else seems to take that seriously. But Tyrion, again, because he's got this foresight, really does seem to understand that that we need to take this seriously, because the matter of ruling the whole realm means the whole realm all the way to the north as well. And this coming right after right after they read Robb's terms ultimately, which they of course staunchly rejected. That's to no surprise. But there's one other scene that happens in King's Landing. What's it called? That really I think is interesting, which is the final interaction between Tyrion and Cersei, where they have that argument about him dismissing Janos Slynt, and he reveals, obviously, he calls her out for placing the order to have Robert's bastards murdered. And then it's revealed through her silence that Joffrey was the one who gave the order. And he says, he didn't even consult her, did you? And that's when Tyrion kind of... It's an interesting moment, because it's a small moment that would normally be missed because there's not a whole lot of action that happens in it. But I think what's interesting here is that this is the moment where Tyrion fully realizes just how kind of the relationship between Cersei and Joffrey, and kind of Cersei's control over Joffrey, is completely destabilized. And him and Tywin both may have been giving Cersei a little bit too much credit for Joffrey's actions. It's the moment where he kind of realizes... even though he's not a parent, and even though he kind of doesn't relate to Cersei at all as far as that sense, he kind of understands just kind of the massive pressure that's been placed on her, where he realizes that they're in this dire strait where they need to be stronger and more unified than ever, since the realm has quite literally fallen apart. But they can't even get their own shit together because Cersei quite literally cannot control her son. And she kind of is just forced to play this very strange back and forth kind of, balancing act, where, okay, he may listen to her, but she kind of has to go along with him because he's the king ultimately. And then she justifies it to him after he makes another crack about her and Jaime by bringing up, obviously, their mother, who Tyrion, who she blamed, which is the main reason why she hates Tyrion's guts, because obviously Tyrion's mom died delivering him. So it's a really interesting moment. It's a really human moment between the two of them. Again, these moments are sparse, but when they do happen, they're really, really well done, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's like the sibling nature of it is well crafted, and we get the sense that like they know each other, all the Lannisters, and when they get caught, and it's like in this case, Cersei gets caught as someone who's not able to control her son, and now Tyrion understands what position that puts the game plan in. It's if Joffrey's doing whatever he wants and he's not listening to reason, and he's not really thinking about like the family legacy. He's just thinking about being, whatever warped sense of a king, is. It basically makes it harder for them to maintain their power and really maintain control over the kingdom. And so, it's one of those things where he also realizes Cersei was, this was all put on her to control Joffrey. And, Tywin's off fighting the war. Tyrion was, is sort of doing his own thing. Jaime is, part of the basically Kingsguard and doing his thing. So basically, Cersei has to control her son, and it's not an easy chore.
It's not fun either, especially just given the type of person that Joffrey is. Because, oh man, if I had that thing for a son, I don't know, man. I don't know. It might lead me to do some questionable things.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how Joffrey does treat Cersei, because there's a little bit of how Robert treated Cersei in Joffrey's actions. Sort of just that scene in the last season where Cersei tells Robert, maybe I should be wearing the pants in the family, and then he just slaps her. So that's the same, very similar tone that Joffrey takes with her. That it's like, you better not do that again. So I think we see like at one point she slaps him and he's like, you'll never do that again. Yeah. And it's one of those things where he understands.
Punishable by death.
Exactly. He understands that, but I think he understands it because of, his father, Robert, and how he, openly treated Cersei.
Right.
With all the whoring and all the stuff, it's like, he basically, Robert disregarded his wife, and therefore Joffrey sort of disregards her in different but similar ways.
Yeah, it's ultimately just once again the plight of women, and just a constant reinforcement of the stuff that they had to deal with, which is that they were largely without power ultimately, and it was almost always their position was almost always completely dependent on the male figures in their life and at the time, and that to me is one thing that kind of makes kind of the ascension of all of the female characters we've come to know and love throughout the course of the series. By the time you get to season 7, to the position that they have between Daenerys, Sansa, Arya, Cersei, Brienne, all of them, like it becomes really satisfying.
There's a scene in this episode that proves your point, and that's with Raz, right?
Yes.
So cut to the bordello, and the one sort of patron is like, hey, I paid this one, and it's not happening. What the hell? I need my money back. And Littlefinger, basically says, oh, hey, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. Gets him with another woman. And then he goes and he sits down with Raz, who's crying because of, the fact that a baby was killed right there in the brothel. One of the other girls had a bastard child with Robert. And so she was a victim.
At the end of last episode.
Exactly. And everyone saw this, including Raz. And, basically Lord Baelish goes, oh, I understand. I really do. But let me tell you about a story.
Let me tell you a little bit of story about the last time that I had a worker for me, get
that
a
was
little
unhappy.
too emotional.
Yeah, it's like no matter what, nothing could bring her back to form, so to speak. And hey, I had to get rid of that bad investment. So as long as you're,
I love the way that he phrases that. It's like, I hate bad investments. It's like, Jesus Christ, that's some ice cold slim shit right there.
Exactly. So like going to your point of just like, how some of the women are treated in this world, that's exactly what it is. It's like, you don't have time to cry, while you're at work.
And everything comes down to the mighty dollar.
And you're at work all the time. So, you better be happy. You better be making money. You better whatever. And essentially, it's a good scene because it really just shows you how Lord Baelish, he might be sort of, I don't know. He, I guess, is an overall skeezy guy.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, he's the skeeziest.
In almost every single interaction we see, it's almost like, hey, we need Lord Baelish in this episode. How can we make him skeezy?
How can we make him even more slimy than he already is with that pencil thin mustache and everything, and like his little accent and his little mockingbird on his chin and everything? Season 2 is definitely the season that showed that utilizes Littlefinger the least because again, the problem is like so many other characters that Martin introduced in book 1. Martin introduced so many characters in the first season, and some of them he expanded on. Some of them obviously got killed off, and then others it's like, oh man, I kind of only had stuff in mind for him for season 2. And it sucks because Littlefinger is like so many other characters is one that it really felt like you had to be in it for the long game for, only because at this point where we leave off in the books, it's like Littlefinger's plan is kind of just to take over the North and the Eyrie, right? And it's like, it seems like they're positioning him in the point where he is going to take over the entire realm himself, but then at one point he just doesn't, and it's one of many instances where just, again, the translation from text to screen gets lost, but ultimately just because Martin didn't have time to finish up what he wanted to do with that character. But yeah, Littlefinger continues to be one of the more compelling characters. Now, we got 3 other storylines to hit for this episode, big ones. Let's do Arya next because hers, again, small scene but very, very pivotal as what's it called in the grand scheme of things. She's actually the opening scene. We finally catch up with her after having not spent any time with her at the end of last episode, with the exception of the final scene in which it shows her and Gendry promptly getting out of King's Landing, with Gendry being the only surviving one of Robert's bastards who was still in the city. It shows Arya. Obviously, making water, I believe is the term, I believe the Westerosi term that they use for it. She comes back over, is arguing with Hot Pie and Lami over some nonsense that basically Gendry comes over and straightens them up and basically tells them, yeah, any idiot can buy armor. They don't have to be a knight, continuing with kind of that whole deconstruction thing. And then it continues with an information exchange for the two of them. When the Gold Cloaks show up looking for Gendry, Yoren has this awesome moment where he pulls out his knife and basically threatens the one guy. I believe it's I forget what that artery is where he has the knife, but he threatens the one guy saying, yeah, he's property of the Night's Watch now, so unless you're coming back here with an army, you're not getting any of these guys. And
the best part about it is the Gold Cloak is like ready to draw, and he just shoves that knife right into the artery. And Yoren has this great line where it's like, I just sharpened this knife over breakfast and I could cut the hair off a spider's ass if I wanted to.
Oh,
and
great
it's like,
line.
it's
line.
very...
Yoren's one of those characters that goes way too soon because he's another one of those characters, every line he has is just awesome. You're like, I want to spend some time with that guy. That guy's probably seen so much shit.
Yeah, he's very specific, and it's clear, like, what his job is in the Night's Watch. And it's like, whoever you're looking for, whoever warrant you have, they're beyond, the wishes of kings and queens. And, that's sort of what the Night's Watch expects. And in this case, Yoren shows you that he's willing to, actually fight and kill to maintain that sort of sovereignty that the Night's Watch has for the task that they have to do,
Absolutely.
which is
once again, not making the same mistake that Ned did, where he actually realizes, if you want to maintain these things, you got to put up a little bit of a fight for it. So this, of course, leads to Arya asking Gendry about his real identity. Gendry has no idea why they want him because unlike Arya, Gendry has no idea of his identity. He just knows, look, all these Hands of the Kings keep coming to ask me questions about my parents, and every time they do, they end up dead shortly thereafter. So he's kind of the mindset, and kind of understandably so, considering where he grew up as the gutter rat in King's Landing, where he's, look, no good ever came out of people asking me questions because all the people that seem to do so end up dead, which of course leads for her to realize that he's trusted enough that she can trust this guy, where she reveals her identity to him and reveals that she's Arya Stark. And they have this fun little
he also knows he confronts her first, right?
Right.
It's like, you're
he
just a girl,
realizes that
right?
she's a girl. He's like, look, I'm not an idiot the way that the rest of them are. I know that you don't take a piss where all the rest of us do. You're obviously a girl. I see through that really bad haircut that you got. So and I think that they have this really funny back and forth where he's like, oh, that means you're a lady. And he starts like, whatever my lady says. Then she pushes him over. I thought that was really funny.
No, it's the fact that they're really playful in this scene. It really helps and builds a rapport because now she's had to deal with all this sort of nightmarish, escaping King's Landing after seeing Ned get killed, like being on the run. The gold cloaks, they came in. She thought they were looking for, her. And basically now it's like a scene where she can actually realize that she has a friend and an ally. And, the interesting thing is, not only does she gain Gendry as sort of that ally here in the episode, we physically see it. We actually, she meets and talks and has a conversation with a man that will be her ally in a few episodes.
The opening scene where she communicates with Jack and Hagar back before him and the whole allure of the Faceless Man is kind of ruined by seasons 5 and 6. But back in this intro, like when she had him as her own personal assassin, that was some good shit. And Jack, and it is an awesome intro to say the least. When she's like kind of being threatened by his compatriots in the cage, and he's just like, a man does not ask for his companions; he must beg forgiveness. I thought that was just really well done.
Yeah, it's
classy,
great.
Even when he's in a cage. It's a good thing that the Faceless Men at least still have manners.
Well, he was basically like, can a man have a drink of water? I haven't, had one in 2 days. And she tries to approach and do it. But as soon as she approaches,
Rorge and Biter have to screw everything up.
Exactly. So, it's one of those things where we don't really know anything about these characters. We just assume they're ruffians and, they're probably extras that are not really going to make it, And
it's pretty obvious that they're not going to make it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, over the next couple episodes, they're sort of just, like, trapped in the cage. But then this is the beauty of the show is that they do plant the seeds early enough and have them slowly unveil to where they're going. And this is one of those that really does pay off. And it pays off this season because we get this mysterious man who has these abilities and helps Arya out, after, they get captured. But ultimately it sets a seed that is, pans out over the course of like 3-4 seasons. And, it basically sets up Arya's overall arc for the show.
Absolutely, yeah. So now let's get into the island hopping segment, let's call it, where we have two characters on islands, one of whom is getting back to his island for the first time, one of whom is still on his island just preparing for wars. Let's talk about Theon. This is the first time where we get Theon on his own, really, away from the Starks, and he's gone home for the first time ever in 10 years, or 9, or however many that it is that Balon says in this episode. You see him first, obviously, on the ship. having sex with the one girl who's the ship captain's wife, and he's explaining the concept of salt
Well,
lives.
I think it was daughter, right?
Yeah, the ship captain's daughter. That's what I meant, not his wife.
But the main thing is this scene doesn't need to happen.
It doesn't need to.
Why do you need to see Theon, just like sleeping around with the captain's daughter? But if you know what happens to Theon later on in the series,
it kind of makes sense why they're having all this sex position in there.
Well,
and I'm not joking when I
yeah.
say that term. That's an actual term that it was made up for this show, sex position.
Well, that's 100% what happens, because it has to be understood that this is like his favorite thing in the world is sleeping around. And, he's young. He, I guess is relatively a stud in the eyes of
in Westeros terms.
Yeah, exactly. And so the fact is, like, this is his favorite body part, and it comes into play later on in the series. So, it's one of those things, any chance that they get to really play that up and just show how sexual active Theon is, they're going to do it. And I think, in terms of foreshadowing and what's going to happen, the ultimate sort of sacrifice that Theon makes, basically, they do a really good job. But in this particular episode, it's like, oh, this is out of the blue.
This is weird. And then it gets even weirder, because then he actually gets to Pike. And then he has that weird, obviously the scene where, he gets back. He's expecting this grand, triumphant welcome back home.
Yeah,
Theon.
no one knows him.
A kid, and there's no one cares. For the most part, everyone's forgotten about him. No one cares. He talks to one guy. One guy's like, who? He's like, Balon Greyjoy is only surviving son and heir. And the guy's like, okay, are you gonna pay for all this shit to be transported or not? And then he sees this one random woman who comes up to him and offers him a trip back to the castle. Like, he's hitting on her like nonstop, but she's like going along with it. Like, I know that incest is a thing here, but like, what? And like, just as far as a mind game goes between siblings, that's pretty sickening, because obviously once he gets back to the castle.
Because Theon goes, he ropes pretty hard in that scene.
Oh yeah, he does.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like, oh my god, like it's like when it's revealed that was his sister, it just kind of makes you cringe, like, oh my god, Theon. Well, it also shows that Theon just doesn't know at all what world he's stepped into.
Right, Theon's been out of touch living with the Starks for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
He's grown very much out of touch.
And the fact that Yara is willing to sort of go along with it and allow this to happen just shows you that she is she's able to maintain a ruse and maintain her position, and she does that out of some sort of strategic mindset. So I think it's one of those things where it is a really bizarre reveal, but it shows you exactly who the Greyjoys really are.
Yeah, absolutely. It shows that they are Ravagers, they are Reavers. They ultimately, and in his first interaction with Balon Greyjoy, who is one of a couple new characters that we're introduced to in this episode.
That episode was great.
Yeah, Balon Greyjoy, episode, what's it called? The Lord of the Iron Island, self-proclaimed king twice now. The thing that I'll say about Balon Greyjoy is talk about a man who does not know how to quit while he's ahead. Literally, the minute that there is even just a whiff of strife in Westeros, he sends out his ships and is like, conquer. And then they fail miserably, because even though the Iron Islanders, as they say multiple times throughout the course of the season, are fantastic at sea raiding, they are terrible at maintaining castles on the land, as is seen throughout the rest of the season and the rest of the series.
Yeah.
But Balon,
well, it's also their mindset, right? It's like during this opening scene that he keeps saying, he's basically like, Theon, why are you dressed like a woman? Like, did you pay gold to dress like a woman, or did you pay the iron price? And that phrase, paying the iron price, is basically it's like remaining ignorant and doing what you want to do, and then whatever happens to you, that's the iron price.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like this sort of
naive, almost.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not exactly like the greatest operating procedure.
It really isn't. Especially because it brings so much more strife, because when the minute that they tried to do that, they got a war landed on them that separated Theon from them, and that killed his two older sons, Roderick and Meryn. So, like, you would think that Balon would have learned his lesson after the last war, but no, he's like, oh, the Starks aren't home. Boom, we're gonna what's it called? We're gonna wage a war with them. And Theon rightfully says, yeah, you're never gonna win against the Lannisters. And he's like, oh, who said anything about the Lannisters? Like, this guy just likes to stir up shit just for no reason, ultimately. And he's only doing it out of spite because Theon tried to recruit him, but he spites him, he shames him, he spits on his offer, and then instead of saying, oh, Robb Stark's going to offer me a crown, now I'm just going to take his home from him. And ultimately, it's a stupid move ultimately in the long run, but right now he sees an opportunity and he's going for it, and it puts Theon in a damn near impossible position, unfortunately, that we know will lead to a string of just all the wrong decisions happening with Theon. But yeah,
I don't know. It's interesting, just that Balon sort of lost Theon when he gave him up, in the peace treaty. And now that he's returning home, he just rejects him straight out. He just will not accept anything. And it's like, hey, Theon, you haven't been here for years. You don't know your people. You don't know the customs. You don't know whatever. And it's almost like he blames Theon. But Theon didn't have a choice. As Theon brings up later on in the season, essentially, Balon just gave him up willingly, and it's not Theon's fault. And it's like, a father should actually accept their son back. And it's one of those things where Theon just, for whatever reason, wants the acceptance of his father and his sister. And he's put in the position, like you say. Does he go for his father's acceptance and betray Robb, or does he sort of betray his father and really stay true to Robb? And that's a decision that he's going to make in a few episodes here in season 2.
Yeah, it's disappointing because ultimately, it feels like every single decision that Theon makes is based, or it doesn't make, or that is made for him is based in some part due to the actions of his father. And it feels like every single time it just results in him being screwed, because the first time it resulted in him growing up with the Starks, which in hindsight probably was the best thing that could have happened to him. But then the second time, when he kind of chastises him and blames him and doesn't even accept him when he comes back, instead of just being happy, it kind of drives Theon to make this decision to betray the Starks, and then it ends up with Theon being held captive and tortured by Ramsay for years ultimately. And so it just shows kind of, I guess, the relationship that they have, Theon quite literally being the runt of the litter. And it's just disappointing because Balon's kind of adherence to his values and the Iron Price, quote unquote, leads him to reject his only living son. And it results kind of in the fracturing of the Iron Islands. It just sucks because just the Iron Islands in general, I feel like both the books, well, I mean, the books are taking a much harder stance on it, but it feels like that's a storyline that the show just forgot about, because they literally just have Yara, who they're setting up to be this pretty crucial character in the last couple seasons, like in season 6, after she's gone for like an entire season in season 5. And then in season 7, she gets captured by Euron, and then season 8, she recaptures the Iron Islands off screen. So it's really disappointing because that seemed to be this storyline that had a lot of promise, especially since Daenerys was going to force them to bring some sort of civility and kind of force them to essentially look, this Iron Price or whatever bullshit you guys do, that's not going to continue to happen. So, but alas, another.
Well, speaking of ships, right?
Right?
There's one other scene in this episode that basically talks about ships, and that's basically Davos. For Stannis on his behalf, goes to a merchant pirate and
Salador San.
Yeah, exactly. And Salador, basically has to be convinced to join Stannis's effort to sack King's Landing, and Davos promises him plunder and sort of glory goes to Stannis and he becomes king. And so it's obviously Stannis is going to have a navy that King's Landing cannot stop. And the funniest part about this scene is Salador just not only wants the plunder, but he also
specifically wants to have sex with Cersei.
Yeah, he wants to, just take ownership of Cersei and basically, unfortunately, there's no way around it. Rape and pillage.
Yeah.
He wants to sort of, degrade her as much as possible. And Davos has to say, unfortunately, I can't promise you that. not something I'm interested in. It's like if you're ransacking the city and you happen to stumble upon the queen, that's your thing. And this is also a good scene because Davos' son is there in this meeting, and this sort of request from Salador disgusts him so much. It's not something that people following the Lord of Light would believe in. And it really sparks a whole religious debate between Davos and his son. And, obviously Salador is a merchant and he's, knows all the religions of the world, and he doesn't really believe in it. But, Davos' son is begging him to, basically his father, to accept the Lord of Light. And Davos looks him straight in the eye and says, you know what, if you want me to find religion, then my religion is Stannis. It's like whatever I can do to help further his effort is what we're going to do. And so I think, again, Stannis' introduction of burning people on the beach, or the idols on the beach the last episode, and now this sort of, getting a 30-ship navy, we're really starting to ramp up, that Stannis is a real threat to King's Landing. And, we're going to see, well, the last scene is Melisandre basically
seducing him.
Yeah, seducing Stannis and saying, hey, I'll give you a son and heir. And, that's something that Melisandre is sort of using her powers to do something with Stannis that we're eventually going to find out.
Not the first time she's done it. Not nor will it be the last time. I think that the Davos and his son, debate about the religion, as far as everywhere we sail, that there's always somebody that's found the right thing, right? The right idea, right? I think that's directly juxtaposed against the Stannis seduction scene, because the whole idea is around kind of the idea of religion in Westeros that is kind of started by this season, is this idea that kind of it's all based in human subjectivity, and there's not really one kind of overall religion, because obviously we've met all of these different races and creeds and cultures, right? Obviously the North have the old gods, the South have the seven, the drowned god, the R'hllor, the red priest, the Dothraki gods. Everyone has kind of their own different set of their own set of deities, their own set of religious values. But the reason why it's directly juxtaposed against the next sequence is because it's supposed to potentially hint at the fact that of all of these religions, the religion of R'hllor might actually have some instance of power behind it, as we see later on in the season, as far as what Melisandre is capable of and what the Red Priestess are capable of, as far as continuing their long age under the guise and veneer of being ageless, even though they're really hundreds of years old, generating fire from seemingly nothing, what's called being immune to poisons. It's all little stuff that's subtly hinted at, right? But it's this idea that, like, okay, all of these other religions are a thing, but this might be the first one that actually has some power. Because it's not until that we start to see the Faceless Man in action that we start to realize, oh, so there might actually be some merit to this this kind of sorcery and this kind of and this religion, And it's always been very interesting to me, kind of how Stannis, for him being this experienced battle commander, constantly, him kind of being in the guise and the awe of this, religious figurehead. It's always been very fascinating to me about him as a character, especially since he has somebody like Davos in his corner as well. Davos, who states right here that he is a man of practicality. He even says, he's like, yeah, I don't pray. Whenever I go out, I just went out and did what I had to do, and that was that. There was no God that came in and saved me or anything like that. And he's like, you want me to worship someone? Worship the actual man who's going to do something. He raised me from nothing. He gave you a future that I never could have. Davos is a man of practicality, ultimately. And I think that's ultimately what brings him into conflict with these kind of religious ideas, is the fact that he is a man based in such practicality that he can't really get behind the idea of, there being this supernatural force that guides his life. And so obviously when he sees in a couple episodes just what Melisandre is capable of, it horrifies him,
Yeah, exactly. And, this scene is really good at planning some future stuff for Davos, because his son, Davos says, hey, I've never prayed and I've always returned. And then his son, says, I've always prayed and you returned. So there's a little bit of back and forth. Like his son is a religious zealot and, is trying to convince him. His son even says, hey, I'll teach you how to read so you can read the scriptures because they're more convincing than I am.
More setup.
So Yeah, it sets up his inability to read, and that he comes from some a little bit of a lower background, even though he serves pretty high up there in Stannis's court. So
Absolutely.
it's we're getting to know a little bit more and more about what's going on in Stannis's sphere of influence, and I think that's pretty cool to see that happen in this episode.
Absolutely.
So, Dom,
We get to
I
the
think
last
yeah,
storyline.
I think today. I think this sort of goes into sort of our Agachi verse, because we want to explain a little bit about the
Yes.
universe, but also, I would, suggest that this is one of our main characters too of the
Yes.
episode,
Absolutely.
and that's Craster,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, so we're back at Craster's Keep, obviously. We see Sam and Ben and Gendry. Sam and Ed and Gendry. Oh, my God, I'm getting my names mixed up. Wow. Sam and Dolores, Ed, and Gren. There we go. Now I got
Yeah.
it. Cutting up some potatoes. And Sam, of course, looking at all of the wives and being like, why is it that he gets to have... Don't you think it's unfair that a man has to have this many wives? And it's always been interesting to me, kind of, the whole development of Craster as a character, where you just have this one wildling, because he is a wildling, just sitting in this one ramshackle hut with all of these women around, just kind of tending to himself, and you're kind of wondering the entire time, like, because the Night's Watch did bring this up in the last episode, and I thought it was a pretty fair point, like, how has this guy been surviving here all on his own without any wildling interference or anything, like nothing from the White Walkers or anything like that, And obviously Sam then, saves. We also get the introduction of Hannah Murray's Gilly in this episode, the second Skins alumni on Game of Thrones. Obviously the first being Gendry's Joe Dempsey. You'd slip right there. But,
Wow.
yeah, so we get the introduction of Gilly. Sam saves her, quote unquote, by shooing Ghost away from her. It's kind of interesting, again, how fast these dire rolls grow, where the last season Ghost was like clearly played by like a real dog. But in this season, in this show, he's like now almost like twice the size of a regular human, and it's beyond obvious that it's a CG dog. But so he saves her. She's like, "Oh, you must be very brave." And of course, that's probably the first compliment that Sam's ever heard in his entire life, let alone from a woman, or probably just in his entire life. So of course, what does he do? Brings her over to John and is like, "Hey, can we take her with us?" And John's like, "No,
Well, I think
that's a terrible idea."
you're jumping ahead. Like, obviously, he saves her, and sort of they get to talking, and then it cuts to John, and Sam comes in, and he's nervous, and basically what it comes down to is, Gilly is pregnant, and it's, what happens to the male children, right? Because she's worried that, if she has a son, that something bad's going to happen.
Right, but she doesn't say what.
Yeah, and John interrogates her, and it's like, hey, we can't help you just based on you saying, hey, we need your help. You need to tell us exactly what's going on. And she refuses to do so. She sort of just runs away. And, Sam and John have a little bit of an argument, and, it's kind of left at that right at that point. It's like, this is Craster's Keep. He basically is, as far as I know, he's far enough away from the wall, but like also not really that far north. It's like what, 30, 40 miles or something
like that.
Maybe 50 miles. And so I think, his thing is he has a little interaction with, the wall and people in Castle Black. He has trade obviously with other wildlings because that's he probably belongs to some tribe, at least relatively close to where he is. But he has dealings likely with other tribes, and then he has some mysterious dealings that we're about to find out at the end of this episode with the White Walkers, and this is what it is all about. Is later in the episode, at the very end, John sees Craster walking in the woods with a baby boy, and he decides to follow him. And Craster puts it down in the snow, and a White Walker shows up and takes the baby. And just as John is seeing this, he turns around and Craster just bangs him in the face.
Bashes him in the head.
And
that's
knocks
where
him
the
out.
episode ends.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So we find out that, for whatever reason, we don't actually understand why, but
Varys is giving, but we have this
Craster,
confirmation now. Craster is giving his sons to the White Walkers as their born.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's one of those things where Craster is a very interesting character because he has his sort of house and his keep, and he's pretty well stocked. And he's well stocked because he legitimately all he wants is to be left alone with his daughter slash wives, but he also deals with trade, and the trade with the White Walkers is for his newborn sons, and it's likely that because he has dealing with the White Walkers, that other tribes don't really want too much interaction with him. So therefore, he's sort of protected by the fact that he has this like dealing with the supernatural.
Right, absolutely, and it's a pretty good way to like maintain your spot. If you can keep the White Walkers, if you can keep the White Walkers at bay, then you're pretty much set as far as that goes. So it definitely, I think, makes things a little bit complicated, obviously, once the Night's Watch starts to interfere with his business. But for all intents and purposes, you're right. It kind of is interesting how, even though he's an absolutely repugnant character, he introduces this absolutely repulsive character who commits these vile acts, but in a weird way, he kind of has like solved and kind of carved out his own little fiefdom and kingdom within the realm kind of that's separate. And now that we're seeing that kind of quote unquote doing the right thing in this instance is going to disrupt that piece, because even though obviously we see kind of that the rest of his women come to freedom later on in season 4. By the way, that entire storyline in season 4 of them going back to Craster's in order to murder the Night's Watch members, that is completely original to the show. That was not at all in the books. I think it's really fascinating because more than likely those women ended up getting killed by the White Walkers, because it was revealed that pretty much every living person that was left north of the Wall after a certain point, I want to say like after season 2 or 3, was like murdered and brought into and made into White Walkers. So, and obviously we're going to get into the origin later on as to how these babies end up contributing to the White Walker cause unintentionally. But it's a really interesting, pivotal moment within the entire show ultimately, and I feel like it's largely been forgotten just because of how quickly Craster leaves the show ultimately after next season. So, but we're
going to talk about it big time next week, and we might as well bring it up a little bit now because it's sort of like this is a cliffhanger. Obviously, John gets knocked out, but almost immediately in episode 3, basically Mormont is there, and it's revealed to John that Mormont actually knew the whole time that this is what Craster was about. And so, it's one of those things where, Craster is protected by the Night's Watch, and he's also sort of protected by the fact that he's dealing with the White Walkers. And so it's really this interesting, man and his sort of wives / daughters. And, it's sort of like an impractical alliance that's held, and it's just unsustainable. But Craster is basically doing whatever he can to get the, just like the easy life, so to speak. He's just like right there in this intersection of weirdness that he's been able to craft for himself. And he just wants to live out life and die. Relatively simple but happy man, living this lifestyle. And, it's obviously it wouldn't be Game of Thrones if that didn't all fall apart by the end of the season.
Of course, because that's the Game of Thrones way. Eric actually asked a really interesting question, which I thought was kind of funny, where he's like, also, how does the Night King have some code about not turning women into White Walkers or something? Come to think of it, what's up with that? And the answer is, I don't know. That is an interesting point. Why does he only turn males into White Walkers? What is it? The fact that is it that women are deemed too pure to be able to be turned into White Walkers? That actually is like an interesting question. I feel like that's probably the best question someone's brought up since we started this show. Thanks for that, Eric.
My only guess would be that, if Craster is giving up his baby sons, then the idea is that Craster and like the Wild Wings won't have sort of a male army to fight the Night King. So it could very well be like just the perception of like, women and children, and how you can't really create an army, and therefore it's sort of like that dynamic. It's like you're not really forming an army that can fight the Night King if you're taking the sons from from people. So maybe that sort of has to do with it. Just sort of some perception that it weakens humans by taking their male children.
Absolutely. So we've only got one more thing to talk about for this episode, which is our focus character segment. And today's focus character is none other than Varys, who only has one scene in this entire episode, but I think it's a pivotal scene. Because similar to Cersei in last season's episode 7, I think Varys' role in this episode is crucial to kind of setting up his relationship with Tyrion and kind of his stance going forward, where he has that line in this episode where Tyrion says, "I'm not Ned Stark." He's like, "I'm not honorable. Have me threatened again, and I'll throw you into the sea." And Varys says, "Oh, you might be surprised. The sea is full of all sorts of big fish that can't continue to eat each other, but I'm the little fish that keeps on swimming." You know, it kind of gives us a little bit of a clue, a little bit of an insight into Varys' personality and who he is as a character. But it also kind of lets us know kind of what Tyrion's up against, because it also, it's both setting up who he is as far as kind of really who he is as far as what his stance is in the game, right? We saw him trying to advise Ned to the best of his ability, but ultimately that was folly at the end of last season. But how he sees Tyrion as like a real valuable player and kind of how that's going to set him up going forward, right? We obviously know that Varys came here from Essos. He was a poor man. He was a poor boy growing up in oh my God, I'm trying to remember what free city he was from. Lys, I believe. Either Lys or Qohor, one of the two. And he joined a traveling circus troupe, and he had to, kind of masquerade who he was to survive. And that's kind of how he ended up gaining his personality as far as being the master of whisperers, the man who knows everything, the man who is constantly has his ear to the ground and everything. Not necessarily everyone likes him, but they know that they need him in their corner in order to get what they want. But his own motivations are constantly kept extremely mysterious. So I don't know. What do you make of Varys as a character?
I think Varys is, I think we go back to season 1 and we believe that he's fighting for the realm. And, he uses his abilities and secrets and, whatever to direct outcomes. The whole fact is he tried to direct the outcome of Ned Stark surviving last season, but no one calculated that Joffrey would just all of a sudden say off with his head and lead to his death. So it's, Varys can, as we've seen in season 1, miscalculate. But for the most part, he is someone that sort of tries to deal with his allegiances and alliances and tries to really go for outcomes that he thinks is just for the good of civilization, so to speak. So I think it's one of those things, like in this case, him going in there and starting to play the game with Tyrion, and Tyrion immediately recognizing it and shutting it down. Varys always looks for, characters that he can openly have alliances with, or at least openly fight with, like in Lord Baelish's case. They know that they have different opinions and different strategies, and in that season 1, Lord Baelish calls him out, and Baelish thinks he has Varys, in a checkmate. But it turns out that Varys actually foresaw what Baelish was doing and was able to counter his check. And so it's one of those things where, we're going to see how Tyrion and Varys throughout the rest of this season, how they interact and how they deal with the fact that Tyrion is growing in power throughout the entire season 2.
It's a little bit hypocritical where Varys constantly says that he's, in favor of whoever's best for the realm, which for the longest time it's revealed later on that it's Daenerys Targaryen, obviously. But he's constantly flip-flopping sides, and it really is ultimately just, who it is that Varys kind of wants to side with in the moment. We'll obviously get into that as among many other things. Time goes on later on with the rest of the show. But I think it's a little bit hypocritical where he finally recognizes that there's a worthy player in the game, at least until he isn't. So
yeah, well, I think he wants stability above everything else. And so what he was trying to do in the first season was prevent, all-out war, and that didn't happen. Once Joffrey killed Ned, basically, we have the War of the Five Kingdoms.
Yep.
That doesn't really end until some shaky alliances are made within the third season. And so, going into the fourth season. And it's one of those things where, Varys didn't want that. Varys,
Right.
if he could have avoided season 2 and 3 and everything that happened and all these sort of bloodshed and war, a civil war, he would have rather had that. And I think that's that. Now that this happens, his decision later on to sort of, back Daenerys, is probably because the infighting and sort of breakdown of the Seven Kingdoms continues to happen. It's like he can't really trust anybody there to really sort of bring stability back. And I think he's, a desperation move to sort of go team with her in the later seasons and bring her into Westeros to see if, hey, let's just hopefully end this kind of chaos that's going on here at home.
Absolutely, yeah. And with that being said, that's our focus character segment on Varys. Again, we had one death this episode with Recaro. Unfortunately, rest in peace. Pretty cool character, I guess, for what time we got to know him with. But alas, he will be missed. And that is it for our week's episode of Talkin' Thrones. Thanks again, Eric, for being the only person to contribute in the comment section, ultimately. You guys can tune in next week for our next episode, episode 3 of season 2, What is Dead May Never Die, the famous Greyjoy saying that could also kind of double as their motto. It's interesting kind of how these houses, like, they have their mottos, but then they have the phrases that they say all the time that people think that are their house mottos. But I wonder if they have, like, a checks and balance services in place. Or, like, at what point do we still maintain these family words before we just let our motto become our new family words? Because what is dead may never die may as well be, like, the Greyjoy words, even though they're we do not sow. So I definitely think that should be a thing going forward. But what were your guys' thoughts on episode 12 of Talkin' Thrones, season 2, episode 2, the Nightlands, whatever they are? Leave them in the comments section below. Be sure to also click the subscribe button, click the like button on this video, click the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. Pat, where can the good people find you?
Hey, listen, Dom, it's like I'm helping you out with this show, obviously, every week. So here on the Talkin' TV channel, you can totally find me giving my opinion about this show week to week. And, hey, I have this Instagram at Patrick W. Huber, and I swear to God, I'll post one day something, but that's where I'm directing people for now, and I'll figure it out at some point.
Then you can find me, of course, at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, and posting all the time here on our channel at Talkin' TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. We post there every single day, twice a day. Make sure you guys check it out. That way you guys get notified every time we've got stuff coming out this week. Tomorrow, we've got our Old and Ted Lasso Season 2 premiere podcast dropping this Wednesday. We've got M. Night Shyamalan ranked, my next director ranked video. I haven't done one of those since David Fincher last year. I'm very excited for that. And, of course, this coming Friday, we've got mine and Chris's next variety show topic, where we've got plenty of TV show topics that we bring your guys' way every single week. We've got all of that and more. So much content to give you guys all. And, of course, you can find that you can continue to support us and all the content that we give you guys by clicking the subscribe button down below. That's it from us. The Battle of the Throne commences next week. Same time, same place. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. See you guys next time.